Welcome to our Bridge to Wellbeing workshop, Know Your Rights. My name is Jocelyn Castillo. I'm a team member here at Bridge. At Bridge to Wellbeing, we educate individuals on the power of freedom. We believe that freedom leads to more prosperity and well-being. Today we're going to talk about Know Your Rights. And this class has a particularly important place in my heart. Before I joined the team here at Bridge years ago, I lived in the Central American country of Honduras. If you know anything about Honduras, it's beautiful, it's warm, it's got lots of palm trees, but it's also really, really dangerous and corrupt. So my parents had a tough time living there and they decided to move here to seek a better life. I couldn't understand why it was that America was so much better and had so many more opportunities than Honduras. So I took it upon myself to find out. Looking at history, at our founding fathers and documents, I realized that the Constitution was the single most important document that kept this country free. So this is why it's so important for us to understand our freedoms, our rights, not only so that we prevent anyone from taking them away from us, but also so that we can thrive and make our communities free, our homes, our country, and our families. Today we're going to learn about the powerful tools that you have at your disposal by simply understanding your rights. Our speaker, Alisa Artigas, is fantastic, and she's going to walk you through all of our rights. And if you have questions, please ask. We want you to be interactive, but at the end of the day, we want you to go home and understand that you have the power to own your own life, to own your families, your communities, in this country. You just have to know what is at your disposal. So please welcome Alisa Artigas.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. I did not come from a beautiful place in Central America. Instead, my story is a little bit different. My name is Alisa Artigas, and I was born in this country to somebody who had to escape another country because the rights that they had previously enjoyed were taken away from them. And because of this very, very real threat that happened to them, I now have a passion for the rights that this country has given us because my parents really reminded us all the time that the United States is the freest country in the world, it's the greatest country in the world, and we should definitely embrace this and continue fighting to keep it free and prosperous. Because the freer a country is, the more prosperous its people are. You can see this all over the world. So we're going to be talking about your rights. We often talk about rights in this country all the time. We have this right, the right to free speech, for example, the right to do this, the right to do that. But so many people don't quite understand where this all comes from. It comes from the Constitution. But why the Constitution? This is a big question. And think to yourselves, or if you want to shout it out, go ahead, shout it out. Why the Constitution? Does anybody really understand why? Well, let's think about the world before the Constitution. Because we were a British colony, we were subjects of the King of England. And we had to follow the rules of the British Parliament and that king. But it was a fixed class system. If you were born poor in Britain, in the 1700s, you were going to die poor. It's just the way that it was. There was slavery, and slavery is a very misunderstood thing, but let's be very obvious here. The slavery in the United States was horrific because it was race-based, but it wasn't always race-based. It was an equal opportunity slavery, and then somehow it was bettered by making it a racist slavery thing, and of course I'm being very sarcastic there. But slavery was a very real thing throughout the British colonies. All over the world, slavery was practiced. It was brutal. It was horrifying. And a lot of times, the life of a slave was very, very short. And that was one of the most horrific things that the British ended up giving us. There was gender inequality. There were limited rights for everybody. But if you were a woman in the 1700s, you had no rights. You barely had rights to property in most cases. And government torture. Now you think about that, you're like, what are you talking about? No, literally, people could be taken by the government, by the crown, and tortured to get a confession, whether or not you did the crime. The government could torture you, we're talking real torture, in order to get you to confess to something, whether or not you did it. That was life before the Constitution. Now, the role of government in America is now, we've changed quite a lot of that, actually, all of it. And now when you look at the role of government in the United States, federalism, checks and balances, popular sovereignty. What does this all mean? Well, the first thing on this list, of course, is federalism. A lot of people don't understand federalism. When you think of federalism, most of us will automatically think the federal government controls everything. It's actually the opposite of that. It's where you have a limited role between the larger government and the states. And the smaller the group for governance, the better it is. That was one reason that the United States has been so successful, because of the fact that local government had more control over what was going on than people thousands of miles away sometimes. During the colonial period, we were getting our rules and regulations from Britain. It would take a month for any kind of word to get from London to, say, Virginia. So not really an effective system for governance. It's much better when you can walk down the street to talk to your legislator. The creation of state government and the federal government was the system that we ended up creating for ourselves after the Revolution. Checks and balances. This is a huge thing, and frequently it is also misunderstood. What does checks and balances mean? Well, when you had a king, and the king was basically the supreme ruler of any country, what that guy said went. And in many cases, if you're a history nut like I am, you had royalty that was literally stark raving mad. Great example, the Tsar of Russia, Peter, the second, I believe, had a trial and hanged a rat for eating one of his toys. This was the kind of person who could decide your fate at any given moment. We didn't really want that in this new country that we'd formed. So we created checks and balances with the three co-equal branches of government. The president cannot act unilaterally, nor can Congress. Congress is limited by the Supreme Court and the president, who has veto power. Now, what this does is it just prevents any branch of government from becoming too powerful and therefore violating your rights. Now, popular sovereignty, political ideology that the government is created by and subject to the will of the people. It's a really powerful statement there. Lincoln talked about it, about a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. And that, when we created this government in this country, was a radical and crazy thought. Because again, the majority of countries on the planet at the time of our revolution were controlled by one guy or gal sitting on a throne with a crown on his or her head. And all of a sudden, it was the people that were making the decisions by having a representative republic, where the people would vote for people to represent them. That was a huge concept back in the day. And it's still, in some countries, that still doesn't exist. People are still being ruled by one person who happens to control the military and therefore controls the people. And the citizens are in charge of government and how it's run, but only if they're willing to take an active role in this. Because make no mistake, if you're just voting and going to sleep, you could find yourselves losing your rights very quickly. And here's the thing that I ask everybody that I talk to about their rights. Can the school board raise your taxes? What do you guys think? Yes, they can. Now, a lot of people are surprised by this, but the school board can and often does raise your taxes, and you don't even know about it. And I ask people then this: how many people do you know on the school board? Do you know the names of the people on your school board? If you don't know who's running your school board, even their names, how are you going to know whether or not your taxes are going to be raised when you go to bed at night? You don't. This is why it's extraordinarily important that people don't just vote every 4 years in November, but you have to keep abreast of what is going on in your community at the local level. There's also the old adage that all politics are local. They really are. Because again, your school board, your city council, your county commissions, they can all affect your life very drastically, very realistically. And in many cases, you don't like it, but what are you going to do about it? And that's the big question. So, let's look a little bit at the Constitution of the United States. And if I get too droll and boring, it's because I am a history fanatic. And hopefully I can make all of you history fanatics too. Because the Constitution really was absolutely the most revolutionary document, I think, well, obviously since the Magna Carta. See, nerd. But if you ever get a chance to take a look at the Magna Carta, it was the first instance of people saying to government, no, you have overstepped your boundaries, and the will of the governed is actually something that's important in our lives. And so, seriously, check out the Magna Carta. So I wish this wasn't here because a lot of people get confused as to the date that the Constitution was actually approved. A lot of people will, they confuse 1776 with 1787. But the Constitution was actually approved. It was ratified in 1787. Now, this is why I get kind of sad sometimes. US citizens very often don't know as much about our country as the people who immigrate to this country. And that is a downright shame, especially when one considers how proud we should be of this founding document. So 1,000 people were given a citizenship test, and they couldn't answer. 38% couldn't pass. That's a terrifying thing, because that means 38% of the people in this country don't know their basic rights as citizens of the greatest country on the planet, and that is terrible. So, some of the questions on there. What are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution called? Bill of Rights. And what is Independence Day? And a lot of people, it might sound silly to you, but if you don't understand that the 4th of July isn't just about picnics and fireworks, you're going to be the sort of person that's going to let your rights slip away. And how is the US president elected? That, of course, brings up a lot of recent past controversy. But seriously, why is knowing these facts important? Well, because the people that are elected every year are the ones that are creating our laws for us. So if only 21% even know the number of senators, okay, we'll let that slide, fine. But do you not know, if you don't know the 3 first words of the Constitution, that's kind of a big deal. Why is that a big deal? Because it sets in motion and puts it in, it's codified who runs this place. And that is we the people. Not we the federal government, not we our state capital, we the people make the decisions. A lot of people don't know about James Madison. In fact, a lot of people, when you ask them about who wrote most of the Constitution, will say John Hancock because his signature was the biggest at the end. Or they'll say George Washington. They just don't understand how important James Madison was. And by the way, this was a guy in his early 20s when he wrote it. 81% know the number of Hanson, the band. You know, they were awesome in their day, but I think this part's a little more important. Knowing www is the first part of a URL. The Three Stooges, some of the younger folks might not know about this, and most would know about Bill Gates. It's important stuff to know. Pop culture is very important. But if you don't understand the foundations of our laws, you've got problems. Civics is good. I believe this very, very, very much. When you look at civics, and it's not being taught in school, as I said before, immigrants to this country know more about our rules and regulations and laws and history than a lot of people who are born and raised here. And again, as the child of an immigrant, this bothers me, especially the lessons that I was taught growing up and hearing about the hardships that my family faced in the other country. If we don't understand who we are, it's harder for us to function as a society. So I encourage everybody here, really, if you are out of school, pick up some books. There are some phenomenal books talking about our Constitution that I would highly recommend. And look at some of the books that were written that inspired our founders. If you have a chance, read things written by John Locke, if you can, because basically he was downright plagiarized by our founders, but they didn't have plagiarism laws back then. But John Locke was extraordinarily important in the founding of this country. Higher civic engagement is one of the direct results of people understanding how government works, why government works, and the foundations of our society. And the smarter the voter, the better decisions he or she is going to make. That's just a given. That's daily life. The smarter you are, the better decisions you usually make. And it will help us maintain our republic. And that is the most important thing, maintaining this republic. It was a very famous quote. Benjamin Franklin was asked by a woman in the street, "Mr. Franklin, what have you given us?" And his response was, "A republic, if you can keep it." And remember, again, I come from a family who thought it couldn't happen there. It happened there, and they lost their freedom. So it is extraordinarily important that we maintain our republic. So the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were created by the founders because they had gotten together, they had created this magnificent Constitution, which is absolutely, without argument, the best in the world. In fact, many countries base theirs on ours. But they didn't feel it went far enough in preserving the basic rights of a citizen. So they created the Bill of Rights. It's the first amendments, the first 10 in the Constitution. And these rights, they wanted to make sure, they wanted it almost in stone to preserve the rights that were guaranteed by the Constitution. The first one, the First Amendment. A lot of people quote it. A lot of people don't necessarily understand it, but it is your freedom to speak freely. You can write whatever you want about whatever you want. You can practice whatever religion you want. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The Third Amendment, quartering of soldiers. What? What's that? Well, the British, sometimes to keep an eye on the people, would put British soldiers into their homes, and your Joe citizen would have to basically feed and take care of this soldier who was essentially there to spy on you, and you had no say in the matter. And that was a very sore point with the founders, and so they wanted it codified into law that no, we're not going to be putting soldiers in your house. Because essentially, these people were under house arrest, and they had to feed their jailer. The Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. The police cannot come into your house and look around without a warrant that comes from a judge. Because when the British were in control, they could literally just show up at your house, walk in, search the place for whatever they wanted, and they could pull crimes out of a hat, basically, by coming into your house and finding something not in order, not necessarily what they were looking for. And in fact, in many cases, they were just going in to find anything in order to take you in. Double jeopardy and self-incrimination. This is a very big deal in the Fifth Amendment. There are still countries in the world today where you are guilty until you prove you're innocent. We were the first country that said, no, 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 no. If you're going to accuse somebody of committing a crime, it is up to the state or the accuser to prove that the crime has happened. And that was a big deal. And double jeopardy, once you've been acquitted of a crime, found not guilty, you can never be tried for that again. Also in other countries, you can sometimes be tried over and over and over until the state gets the verdict that it is looking for, which is almost always against you. So we have codified this into law. You cannot have this happen to you. You have the Sixth Amendment, which laid out this is how we are going to prosecute people who are accused of crimes. The jury trial, again, it's not just one judge who may or may not have good motives. It is going to be a jury of your peers. This, again, back in the day was revolutionary. Cruel and unusual punishment. You cannot be hanged for stealing a loaf of bread. That sounds ridiculous, right? Well, if you ever read anything from that period, even up until the 1800s, somebody caught stealing in London could be hanged. And sometimes people were starving, they'd steal bread. You could literally be killed for things like that. So we have the idea in this country that the punishment should match the crime. So cruel and unusual isn't going to happen. And believe me, when it came to cruel and unusual, the British were masters at it. Do a little reading on what they did to people accused of treason. Rights of the people in the state. That means basically, if it's not codified, and it's the same thing with the 10th Amendment, if it is not codified in this document, in the Constitution of the United States, it is up to the state, the locality, or the person, him or herself, to make that decision. That is another one that is huge. And you hear a lot of people speaking about the 10th Amendment, but the 9th is just as important, about the idea that you can literally say, that is not the federal government's business. And you are absolutely within your right to say that, because if it isn't in the Constitution, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. Now, of course, we've let this slide like crazy in this country. But as long as people aren't being too infringed upon, I guess they don't care. But I'm one of those people who has a problem with a lot of these things. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these quotes, because some of these are some of my favorites. Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. Again, smart people, educated people make better decisions. And if you don't have a basic understanding of how this country works, how it was founded, and why it's so great, you're not going to appreciate it, and it's going to be easier to take it away from you. And I mean that literally, taken away from you. I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that. Then I realized I was somebody. Lily Tomlin, who is one of the funniest comedians out there, is so right with this. And we hear so many people, you probably have heard it today. Somebody oughta. Well, what about you? I mean, there are actions all of us can take every day to affect change in our communities. Sometimes it's as easy as picking up the phone and calling your city councilman and saying, you know, we need a stop sign on this street. Or it could be writing a letter. It could be gathering your friends together to discuss issues over coffee and then figuring out what you all can do as a group. There is so much that every individual can do to help affect change for the positive in this country. And I would like to see everybody getting involved, even people who disagree. There are common issues that we can come together and make this place so much better. So that is one of my favorites. And never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Because remember, the entire Revolutionary War that led to the creation of this country was started almost literally by a group of people that got together over coffee in coffee houses and discussed the concept of freedom. And there we are today.